What screams, I'm economically illiterate? Expecting prices to reduce when inflation goes down. Inflation is the rate at which prices increase, so 10% would mean that a $10 sandwich now costs $11. However, if the inflation then drops to 0%, that sandwich will now still cost $11. Prices only go down with deflation, i.e., negative inflation, but generally, governments want to avoid deflation as it encourages saving your money, not spending it, which is bad for the economy. This is the number one misconception people have right now. Everyone expects prices to go back to 2019 levels. It's just not going to happen. And if it does, then it's bad news. The best we can hope for is sustainable inflation and wage growth. Too many people in the US have gone too long without ever having to experience inflation, so they have no idea what it really entails. This is a thing I keep trying to explain to people. I work for a home building company. People complain about the cost to build a home now as if we have control over it. I can't make 2x4s cheaper, and I can't pay our employees less money or they will leave. I can't demand that subcontractors lower their rates, and things have gotten more expensive and they will not go back down. What needs to happen is workers need to collectively demand more money from their employers to catch up to the rising cost of living. Alright, so I feel like I'm going to have a ton of quote unquote today I learned moments from these stories. But yeah, I feel smarter now, but also more wary of the future if prices won't actually go down as you and I probably expected before this story. Shoot, I need a higher paying job then if that's going to be the case. Story 2. Not understanding marginal taxes. No, there is no scenario where you get a raise and your take home pay goes down because of reaching a new tax bracket. Only if you don't factor government assistance programs, which, if you cross that threshold, can be a net negative for you. The benefits cliff is real but rare, in the US anyway, and usually you're still better off because momentum will carry you further. Turning down a promotion because it will send you over the benefits cliff means you're also turning down further raises and promotions that would come from the position with more growth potential. I find it's best to explain it using an example. So let's say these are the tax brackets and you make 100K even. 0 to 50K, 10% tax. 50K to 75K, 15% tax. 75K to 100K, 20% tax. And 100K plus, 25% tax. A lot of people believe if you make 100K, you will be taxed 20% for your entire income. So, 20% of 100K is $20,000 in total taxes. In reality, your total income is segregated and taxed according to the tax bracket. So, 10% of 50K plus 15% of 25K plus 20% of 25K equals 5K plus 3.75K plus 5K equals $13,750 in total taxes. Likewise, given the scenario, people assume a raise would push their entire earnings in the 25% tax bracket. In reality, only the amount of the raise would be taxed at that 25%. Sometimes people who are laymen kind of get this and know it, but are not articulate enough to say it fully. Also, a problem with modern communication where everything is being short and no one has the attention span to listen and follow something fully through so they can really understand it. Also, capital gains can do the same thing. There was, at least last I checked, a hard cutoff for some things like earned income tax credit, and you just lost it all if you made over a certain amount, around $4,000 in capital gains. All this does is bring us to the point that all this crap should be fixed, that every person at all stages of earning and all combinations of earning should never have to think about this. They should trust that it's all been worked out, so simply making more money is always the right choice. The fact that it does not speak to the poor job our lawmakers have done. Story 3. Not knowing the difference between finance and economics, and probably a lot of the same people who don't know the difference between weather and climate. On the weather-climate subject, I don't think anyone realizes how rudimentary our understanding of the interaction between weather and climate is. For example, we know that the El Niño Southern Oscillation has an impact on Northern American weather patterns, especially short-term convection that leads to severe storms and tornadoes. We can even reasonably predict whether we're going to have an El Niño or La Niña several months into the future. However, the forcing mechanisms behind the oscillation are still only theoretical. They are quite solid theories, but not ready to be called proofs. In other words, we think we are sure why it happens, but it still lacks scientific rigor. That's just a regional scale mechanism. The scariest thing is that meteorological record keeping is brand frickin' new. We have absolutely no idea whether there are planetary oscillations that are occurring on a 100, 1000, or even 10,000 year timescale. They probably exist, but we're at least 10 generations of humans away from having enough data to identify them. They probably even have direct interaction with 1,000-year solar cycles, but we have absolutely no idea if and how much that is true. I don't know, man. Knowing the difference, at least at the level OP knows the difference, between quote unquote climate and weather sounds pretty deeply niche to me, don't you think? Story 4: Sunk cost fallacy. Now, the hardest part of this is knowing when something is a lost cause. Not always an easy decision. Used cars are a fantastic example of this. It is often only readily visible in hindsight. You could sink $3,000 into that new transmission for your old car and it runs another 10 years, in which case you made a smart decision. Or the engine could blow the week after and the axle the week after that. You'll never know which repair is the one that would have been cheaper to just replace the vehicle. The sunk cost fallacy is when you continue to do something because you've already invested so much in it. If you hadn't previously spent time or money or labor on it, you would not. Some time ago, Matt Pat from Film Theory made a video arguing the sunk cost fallacy of Costco doesn't save money to its members. However, as a member of Costco, I can almost guarantee that with solid discretion, even for just a few Costco-specific perks, you would easily save money several times over if Costco was the gas station choice alone. The sunk cost fallacy doesn't make sense to not save on the membership by continuing to go. Maybe a little time lost, but even non-Costco members want those savings on gas. And that's just one benefit with discretion of savings from Costco. Story 5. There was a survey done in the last year or so asking Americans whether they thought the current unemployment rate was a 50-year high or a 50-year low. A substantial fraction thought it was a 50-year high. Most people are totally unfamiliar with the actual economy and instead have beliefs driven by news headlines. Lack of perspective is a lot of the issue here. It's a lot more understandable when young people do this because they have a smaller frame of reference, but the amount of older people who act like this is a large-scale issue that baffles me. If you're over 40, you've seen the economy actually get bad, as an adult, multiple times. It's also a fundamental misunderstanding of the quote-unquote unemployment metric that's supplied by the government. The unemployment numbers most often come from the U.S. Department of Labor's Unemployment Office. The only people visible to that office as unemployed are people who are receiving unemployment benefits. Not everyone who has lost their job is eligible to receive those benefits, and even if they are, the hurdles to keep those benefits in a lot of states are completely arbitrary and asinine. A lot of states have requirements that you have to submit 3 applications per week, and if you turn down any acceptance offer, you're automatically kicked off of unemployment. So you could be an engineer or a machinist that lost his job, but if you turn down that job offer for McDonald's you applied for, you're going to lose your unemployment benefits. Unemployment is measured by several different metrics by the government. There is a tiered system of U1-6. U3 is the one typically used and what you're talking about, but the others are still measured and affect policy. Certain people with agendas do selectively use these to paint a narrative, but these stats are still super easy to access. U6 is the most broad definition and is currently about as good as it's ever been. Unemployment, even by the broadest definition, was largely fully recovered from 2 years ago. Trends between U3 and U6 are closer than you'd think they'd be too, even if the actual numbers are way different. Story 6. Thinking installment payments are significantly cheaper than paying all at once. There was this Canadian show in the late 90s or early 2000s called Until Debt Do Us Part. A financial advisor would help couples who are in desperate need of financial help. One couple, she couldn't understand how they were in their situation. Husband had a really good paying job, house was modest, and things on the outside appeared fine. Then she found out that the husband insisted on doing payment plans on everything they owned. The TV, stereo, couches, dining room table and chairs, home computer, of course mortgage, and a car lease. He was convinced it's cheaper to pay a little each month than one lump sum. Sure, you pay more in the end, but you can't be using your money now to make more money. Well, each month they were getting monthly installment bills for all this freaking stuff, and they eventually just couldn't keep up. So they start slipping behind in some, and of course these things have huge interest when you miss payments. Just what a freaking disaster. But also, it depends on the interest rate. If you're paying a low interest rate or even paying at 0% interest, it can technically be cheaper than paying upfront, since you can then invest that money you would have paid upfront. But all this ties into being financially responsible and not just taking more and more loans just because the interest rate is 0% or super low. 3 easy payments and one freaking complicated payment. We ain't gonna tell you which payment it is, but one of these payments is gonna be a which. Oh, and since you're already here, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me out. Story 7. Big new truck parked in front of a house that looks like it is about to fall down. I think big new trucks in general, it's hard to see any economic sense in spending $80,000 plus on a vehicle that pretty much does the same amount of work just as well as any old Toyota pickup can. These big new pickup trucks are literally emotional support vehicles. My neighbor, before he got arrested for God knows what, was an insurance adjuster or something. I make a very comfortable living in software and decided to treat myself to a new car. First car I ever had was almost brand new, dealer loaner with like 3,000 miles on it, and I quite like it. A few months into ownership, neighbor guy sees me outside getting something out of said car. Nice car, what year? Thanks, 2023. Man, now I've got to get a new car, tired of seeing this nice car next door and me driving an old beat up Subaru. A few weeks later, he comes in with this massive Ram pickup. Like it looks like you'd need a step ladder to get in, all because he got tired of seeing someone else with a new car, so yeah, literally an emotional support truck. Well, also cars that don't quite fit the obvious economic district you're in. I heard a joke once about how you can go into rich neighborhoods to see expensive cars. You go into middle class neighborhoods to see moderate cars. You go into low income neighborhoods to see expensive cars. It's funny because, well, it's true. Story 8. A lot of people actively refuse to live at or below their means. You'll meet people making over $100,000 a year still living paycheck to paycheck because they just spend all the money they make. Keep this in mind when people talk about the economy, since a lot of people complaining absolutely could be living comfortably if they downsized a bit. People who are actually struggling often sound basically the exact same as well-off people who have been slightly inconvenienced, which leads to a lot of distortion in how people perceive the economy. Lifestyle creep is real. It used to get to me. Now I have savings, retirement accounts, portfolios for my tiny children, etc., and it feels good. I am very grateful to my family for just raising me to be cheap. My salary has basically tripled over the past several years, and my living expenses have gone up maybe 30%, and most of that was inflation. I just don't really feel like I need that much more stuff. Just living like you're lower middle class instead of regular middle class isn't really that bad. Having to stress about funds all the time sounds worse. Story 9. Refusing a raise because, quote, it'll bump you up to the next tax bracket? With people who don't understand progressive tax, this isn't going to be a good argument. Based on their understanding, they want to make the maximum amount within their tax bracket, so taking a pay cut isn't in what they think is their best interest. Even taking a pay cut to get down to the lower tax bracket, they have a minimum amount of expenses and probably can't afford that. And if they got a big enough raise, they'd probably take it if what they think is their tax increase would be covered by the amount in the raise. So they won't take a $500 raise if they think it'll make their taxes jump up $3,000, but they'll take a $6,000 raise if they think it'll make their taxes jump up $3,500. Of course, people who don't understand progressive tax are also super unlikely to actually do the math that would be required to figure out if a raise is, quote, worth it. But my point is, make less money to pay less tax isn't necessarily going to make the light bulb turn on for them. It's very easy to explain this to them in a simplified, understandable way. You get taxed 12% on the first $44,000 you make. Everything after that $44,000 get taxed separately at 22%. So you're taking home your current income plus the raise with its own higher tax. Story 10. A parrot whose owner has buyer's remorse. Parrots live for up to 60 years and some can last to 100 plus. When you get one, you're basically committing to caring for it for the rest of your life. In fact, there's a chance it will outlive any kids you have, not a decision to take lightly. My sister has like 12 parrots and conjures of varying lifespans, and she's crazy. The African gray she rescued from a bad situation with our neighbors, so I don't fault her for that. But the number of other ones she's bought over the years is nuts. They require so much care and specialized diets and etc. It's just so very expensive. For anyone who wants to buy parrots or other animals that live a long time, please try to find locals who are no longer able to care for their animals, or to phrase it better, animals who no longer have owners. I know it's sad to have your pet pass, but it's even sadder for a pet to be left alone after its owner passes. Story 11. Every single TikTok/social media guru headline repeated but no actions ever taken. Like 401ks are a scam and will be worthless, or you need to have multiple Airbnbs to retire, or it's all about Section 8, etc., etc. People who hate on 401ks for some reason love pensions. I think it's one of those things where it's super young people being nostalgic for something they never even experienced themselves. Those same exact people can get angry that your health insurance is tied to your job and that you should job hop to get a raise instead of actually working hard. They all don't understand that if the company goes under, the pensions would also go under with them. They don't understand that the full vesting period for pensions would be 20 or 30 years, which is why people were very loyal back then. They had to be. They don't understand that companies would regularly go out of their way to lay off and fire people who were just shy of the vesting period to save money. Pensions suck. 401ks are basically the same thing, but vesting periods are way shorter and you, the employee, own them. They're immensely better in every way. Also, asking why we can't just print more money to solve a recession, I wouldn't say they're illiterate though. The basic idea is there, just a little off in execution. The way we get out of a recession is by spending more money, it's just that we're not necessarily printing that money to do so. Instead, it's through buying bonds and lowering interest rates, direct deposits, etc. Anything to increase spending. I think people hear that spending is increasing or we're pumping more money into the economy and just aren't aware where that money is coming from. Just knowing we need to increase spending is the right start though. Lastly, routinely taking out payday loans. So much for this one. Most of the people taking payday loans know perfectly well that they are getting screwed, but they didn't have a choice. The beater car needs new brake pads or they'll lose their job, but now they're in a hole and need to keep rolling over the loan to literally afford food. They'd love to take a loan at more normal interest rates, but banks aren't interested in customers that have no money to invest. We like to think that people taking payday loans are normal, responsible people falling on hard times. But I'd say about 90% of the time, they are just absolutely horrible with money. I worked with a guy that was caught in the trap for months. I think the owner eventually just offered him a free loan to pay it off. It made more sense to pay him back $200 every 2 weeks and still have money left over than paying the loan place, however much, and still asking for a cash advance because you're broke a week into a 2-week pay period. It seems like there are a surprising number of people who don't even understand how interest works or why the rate matters. Okay, so this is the first time I'm hearing about payday loans, and I cannot imagine the vicious cycle you could get yourself trapped in using those. Story 12. Anyone promoting the idea that tax cuts for billionaires will feed the hungry, heal the sick, house the homeless, or in any way approve the lot of Joe Schmo. Along similar lines, anyone who thinks raising taxes on just billionaires will actually meaningfully fund all the things we need and want to fund. There's not enough billionaires for that. You really need to raise taxes on the entire top quintile, at least, which is where the political will to tax is lacking. The idea is that any money in the hands of a private citizen is going to generate economic activity which benefits all, including feeding the hungry. This isn't some crazy idea. Now, as a policy, you might disagree with it and argue the benefits don't outweigh the costs, but it's a centuries-old idea. They'll have more money to hire more people, they say, as if they're all just wanting to help out the little guy and the government is keeping their hands tied. Another one professing that the current president is responsible for the economy when, in actuality, the president has had very little effect on it, especially the global economy of which we are very much tied to, especially when the economy of today is the consequence of policies set decades ago. Things don't change overnight, certainly not within one presidential term. Well, so far, if you've liked these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this one. Catch you in that video, and thank you for watching this one.